Hello, and welcome to the next episode of Clock Out the Vicarious Life. Today, I am so excited because I get to interview Ember Swift. She is a Canadian musician and songwriter currently living in China. She has released 13 albums and has done countless international tours. She has traveled the world and is here to tell us all about it. Welcome. How are you,
Thank
Ember?
you. I'm very well. It's 6 a.m. here in Beijing, so stretch. Good
Yes.
morning.
It's 3 p.m. here in the blistering cold Montana. So, yeah, we are on totally different parts of the world, different climates, different everything.
Yes, definitely. Although it's
So,
cold. It's cold here. Don't worry. It's cold.
is it?
Just
What's the
not as
average
cold as
temperature?
Montana. Well, you see, I operate in Celsius, and currently it's around, I don't know, it's about -2 or something in the
Okay.
mornings now. It's coming into spring, which
Okay.
would be what? I don't know.
Like
I'm
40-ish here, 30.
so bad with Fahrenheit. Just never
Yeah.
learned it.
Yeah. It's cold. We'll go with that. So, Ember, I chose you to be on this show because you have such a diverse background. I mean, you have been kind of all over the place. You've got quite the history of transitions and changes, and I think just an amazing career because you've done songwriting, you're a mother. Let's start with the songwriting aspect. Tell me about that. How did you get into singing, and more importantly, how did you become successful with songwriting and producing music?
Hmm. Well, I think successful is a very subjective term. I feel that I've been successful, but of course, I'm not a household name. I'm not a famous artist, but
Sure.
I've had a long-standing career, and I believe longevity is really the key to success. If you can continue to make music professionally throughout your life, then hey, that gives it a giant capital S success
Yes.
in my opinion. But I started songwriting as a young kid. I'm 48 years old right now,
Mm.
but I started songwriting when I was 9 and then began songwriting throughout my high school career when I was career because I liked in high school to convince my teachers to allow me to submit a song rather than an essay. I was
Mm.
I preferred the challenge of writing a song, and I managed to convince a few teachers to let me do that, and then began performing professionally in university. And then, the career just expanded from there. My first album came out when I was 22, and my most recent album came out 2 years ago. So I
Wow.
will continue to release albums. I've released 13 bodies of work, and I still have a very active performance career here in China, and it was also international before the pandemic. Hoping to get back out in to do, excuse me, I'm hoping to get back to Canada this summer to do some shows, but and also to see family.
Uh-huh.
So yeah, what is an active career? It's just being on stage regularly,
Sure.
releasing music regularly and through all the channels and platforms, and believing that music is is your core.
Sure.
So
Okay.
that's what I
And
do.
what, so childhood, you were born and raised in Canada?
I was born and raised in Canada, yeah, just outside of Toronto, Canada, and lived in Canada and in the province of Ontario until my early 30s. And then this dovetails well into what I'm doing in China. Um,
Yes.
I had studied Chinese at university. So my university degree, my undergraduate, is in East Asian studies. And I'd always had a fascination with Asia, specifically China. And I had a background in studying Mandarin. But as a professional musician that was touring all over the place during the 10 years that preceded China, I was averaging 200 concerts a year in Canada, the US,
Wow.
Australia, and one Pacific Alliance island, which is called New Caledonia. You must mention that. You must, as a touring artist, you have to mention your tropical island touring experience. You
Yes.
have to do it. um, anyway, uh, I was touring constantly during those 10 years preceding China, but I had this back pocket dream of finally making it to China, having, studied the language at university and having this desire to finally go there. I took a sabbatical in 2008, and I said to at the time, my agent, my manager,
Mhm.
I said, and my band, I said, I have to take a break. I'm dying.
Mm.
I need a rest. And I focused on getting to this dream destination. So when I came here in 2007, actually, 2007 as a visitor, I just fell in love with the country and the culture, the language, the land. I had to relearn the language. It had been
Oh,
9 years since my graduation
I'm
because I had
sure.
been on the tour, on the road, on tour, doing the musician thing for such a long time that my language skills had atrophied, let's say.
Mm.
But in the 3 months that I was here the first time, I I really felt the language come back. By the end of those 3 months, it sort of I felt like it was like a chiropractic linguistic adjustment. Like it just got, and then
Oh,
suddenly I remembered how to speak Mandarin, which was great. And at the
yeah.
very end of that first time here as a visitor, I met just very casually the person I fell in love with in China, which
Mhm.
is the next visit. So then the following visit, I came back and re met him. Now, the
Mm.
significant part of that is that prior to going to China in 2007,
Mhm.
I was out loud, proud, queer, definitely a poster child for visibility for LGBTQ
Okay.
rights and people and artists, and um, very much very comfortable in my queer identity,
Mhm.
which, just as a parenthetical, queer as a term is a very umbrella term. It
Mm.
includes bisexual, it includes transsexual, it includes gay, lesbian, anyone who's not heteronormative. So I
Okay.
liked that term because sometimes I did find the occasional beautiful man attractive, but I was partnering with women at that time in my life.
Mhm.
But to meet and fall in love with someone of the opposite sex was a big deal at age 33.
Mm.
I thought, wow, I didn't expect that to happen. And I then stayed another 2 months, then came back for 3 months, then eventually moved here in 2008. But I had to go through that big transition of coming out to my audience and saying,
Int.
I have been very clear that love is love and we need to live our love
Mm.
large and we need to embody this belief that love is beautiful no matter where it occurs. And here I have to now come out in a backwards way. I was very out of the closet. Now I have to say, hey, I have to come out of the closet about falling in love with someone of the opposite sex. And actually, that was really huge. My audience at the time was not as open minded as the audiences of today. And I had a huge backlash. People really,
Interesting.
some stayed with me and some really said, okay, well, you're off my list. I don't want to listen to your music anymore.
Wow, that's so like, I mean, that seems so hypocritical. Like, I mean, love is love, right?
I felt so too, but
Interesting.
the time at the time it wasn't as open minded as a Western culture. We weren't as open.
Uh,
There wasn't as much um, advocacy for visibility,
mhm.
and even the bullying campaigns came up in the early teens of the 2000s. That wasn't
Right.
even present in the early 2000s. So in 2007, when I made that announcement, and 2008, when I moved, people were still very insular and very
Mhm.
protective of the queer community and felt that I was betraying or leaving
Sure.
the queer community, which is, of course, not true because I'm
Right.
still very much queer identified. I still am attracted to both women and now men.
Mhm.
Um, so, whatever, I accepted that. I moved
Mhm.
on. I came to Beijing, restarted my career here. We eventually got married. We had 2 children. My kids are age 11 and 9.
Okay.
And then we split up in 2015. That's a longer story, but I'm very happy that we split up. It was a harmonious and peaceful first separation, then divorce formally in 2018. And um, I tell people about that often. I have to speak about that often here in China because people, this is a very stigmatized thing to get a divorce still in China. In the
Mm,
West, it's very normal, right?
yeah.
But in the East, it's still very hush hush. And I am Western. So here in my Chinese dynamic, when I'm speaking to people, either casual, professional, or personal friends, I'm very open about that. And I joke about how we're happily divorced.
It's
And
possible.
yeah, it's possible.
Totally.
And still making music. I decided not to leave China at that point in my life because my kids were really well established here. I wanted them to be fully functional, um, not just verbally bilingual, but I wanted them to be fully literate.
Right. Hmm.
And so, as literate Chinese speakers, they need a bit more time here. It's super hard. This
Yeah.
language is really difficult to learn to read and write. So, yeah, that's why I'm still here.
Do your kiddos speak English as well, I would assume?
Oh, of course, yeah, their
Yeah.
English is fully functional,
Uh-huh.
and because that's the language I speak with them.
Uh-huh.
But they're also at French international school, so they speak French as well. So they're trilingual, actually. And
Wow.
as a
Oh my
Canadian,
goodness.
that's really important to me.
Yeah, that would make
Um,
sense.
and what else can I tell you? That's the very brief, and then we can dive into some details and stories. But
Yeah, sure.
I do have a partner now. We've been together for 5 years. He is from Canada,
Uh-huh.
and probably some of my queer friends were hoping after my divorce that I would go back to the women's side of things. But I'm very pleased to have met a fellow human who happens to be male, and
Yeah,
we're doing well.
very
So
good. And he
yeah.
lives in China too, I would assume.
He does. And the fact that we met here as two Canadians who are both full-time
Yeah.
music makers is pretty
What?
awesome.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
pretty crazy. Um,
Yeah.
okay, so going back to the music aspect, what is your genre?
My genre is also hard to define.
Okay.
That's like another hard question. Um, I would say that it stems from the folk or singer-songwriter genre because originally I'm an acoustic guitar player, but I also play some electric on some of my songs.
Mhm.
But from there, for instance, I have a weekly original jazz show. So I have a lot of jazz music that I have written. And then one of the local jazz bars here, like the main local jazz bar, has booked me as a weekly performer. So I go there every Friday and play a selection of my jazz material. Sometimes I
Nice.
pepper it with the odd jazz standard,
Mhm.
but um, I have enough jazz material in my 13 albums to put on a show. Plus, I have lots of pop and rock that stand outwards from the singer-songwriter material. I have
Uh,
some reggae tunes. I have an entire album of electronic meets folk, so folktronica
mhm.
music.
Very cool.
It came out in 2009 as sort of an experimental album. It's one of my favorite pieces of work because it's so different from what I had done before.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so I think it goes across many style genres. It's hard to
Okay.
define.
Good. Just preparing myself for what I'm going to listen to when I jump on there and download some stuff.
Yeah.
Are we able to download you
Of
anywhere?
course, yeah.
Spotify,
I'm on all the platforms,
all the platforms.
Spotify, iTunes, YouTube, and of course on all the Chinese platforms as well, where I have an even stronger following, having been here for more than 15 years or almost
Sure.
15 years.
Uh-huh.
And that includes like QQ Music and Wang Yi Music and Douyin and all that stuff, which
Uh-huh.
I'm sure you've never heard of.
Nope, nope.
But
That's okay though.
huge market here, right? Huge population. So
Yeah.
those platforms, um, they say that Weibo, which is the Chinese equivalent of Twitter, has more users in China than Twitter has worldwide.
Wow. Yeah, that's crazy. I have never
Just the
been
perspective.
to Asia. I've never been anywhere on that side. It's on my to-do list starting next year, the year after. I'm not sure. We might hit Europe next year. I really want to see Indonesia, all of those different areas. So I'll eventually make it to China. But yeah, it's
欢迎你.
totally what's
That
that?
means 欢迎你. That means welcome. You're
Welcome.
welcome.
Okay. Yeah. And my Mandarin will probably never be, I'm terrified when people tell me that they know Mandarin. That's like saying that they're like neuroscientists, or I mean, like, I feel like you have to be so smart to know Mandarin. Like, I don't, because it's intimidating.
Well, I always people do say that to me back in the West, which makes me laugh because I have met a lot of not smart Chinese people, right, who
Uh,
speak Mandarin
sure.
perfectly.
Right.
And that's the thing is that there are lots of different intelligent levels in every country,
Yeah.
and then there's a language that links them all, right? So yes,
Yes.
the cool thing about Mandarin, though, as a language and as a musician, is that it's a tonal language. So, as soon as I started learning it, that's actually why I switched into East Asian Studies in university because it
Mm.
feels like you're singing while you're speaking. You must continue to be conscious of the tones. And here we have tones in English too, but we can change them and it doesn't change the meaning of the language. So like I can say we have tones in English too. Da 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 da, right? That's like
Uh-huh.
the musical melody of what I just said. But
Yeah.
if I say that differently in Chinese, then I change the meaning of the words. So you have to lock
Oh.
into the melodic tone of the words. Um, and that's what's super cool about this language. It forces a melodic association with meaning. And I
Wow.
absolutely adore that as a musician,
I
right?
bet. Yeah, by the way, I struggle even with music. I don't understand how anybody could ever, I just don't understand it. I'm like, it is literally a language of its own and it's foreign to me. Do you speak, I mean, so when because you're living in China, do you sing your songs in Mandarin then?
Well, I have written songs in Mandarin. In 2011, I did a double disc and I did half of the songs, like one side of the album was
Mhm.
English and the other side was in Mandarin. So I translated the songs and
Mhm.
I thought that was really cool.
Yeah.
Linguistically, it was a great challenge. Um, but I discovered that even though I'm fluent in Mandarin
Mhm.
and I present my shows in Mandarin, I discovered that when I sing in Mandarin, people here were not that impressed, right? They
Mm.
didn't care. There's a huge market of people who sing in Mandarin because there's a
Oh,
huge Chinese and Asian music market.
sure.
And so hearing another person sing in Mandarin and top that off with being a foreigner singing in
Yeah.
Mandarin. So my Mandarin is fluent, but some of my choices for let's flip it. Imagine uh, an immigrant, a Chinese speaking immigrant to the US, writing a whole body of work in English.
Sure.
They might choose to describe things or word things in ways that are strange for a native English speaker. And their
Sure.
songs perhaps would be um, kitsch, perhaps would be interesting and kind of
Uh-huh.
cute, but we wouldn't see them as such great poetic works. This is what
Yeah.
happened to me. So I realized, oh, as cool as it is to go back with a whole body of work to the West and say, look, I wrote a whole body of work in Mandarin. People here would be like, okay, so
Yeah. Okay.
whatever. And I realized, okay, my native language is really what sells here because I am not from here.
Yeah, it's
So
exotic to a degree.
I went back to releasing my songs in my native language, including a few French songs, and then um, still continuing to present my music in Chinese. So I will host my shows in Chinese and translate bits of it for the foreigners that come,
Uh,
and then I will sing most of my music in English. So it was an
Fascinating.
interesting journey that
Yeah. How many languages do you speak considering how much traveling you've done?
just three
Just three?
English, like English, French,
French.
and Mandarin, and
Okay.
that's enough. I don't know. I've met lots of foreigners who
Well,
live here who speak five or six, but whew,
yeah.
I'm good.
Yeah. The majority of people that I've interviewed, I feel like know one or two at most. And most of them, it surprises me, says that you don't really, when you travel internationally, you don't really need anything outside of English anymore between Google Translate and the expectation, is kind of sad. The whole world is expected to learn English and we're kind of spoiled.
Yeah, I think of it as the Pac-Man language. It's like eating other languages all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. It is sad. It's pretty sad.
Yeah.
Okay, so then tell me about your travels. Besides, I mean, you fell in love with China. What were
Mhm.
some other, I mean, were there other contenders on your tours that you thought about maybe making home, or is just China?
Uh, that's a great question. Before I came to China, my tours had been mostly North America based, and I went to Australia 9 different times, and of course New Caledonia, which I mentioned with the mangoes growing on the side of the road. Oh, I loved those tours.
Oh,
I did I did fall in love with New Caledonia. It's a French speaking. I mean, it's not originally French speaking. It's a colonized French Pacific island,
uh,
but I guess the other contender was Australia. I love Australia as a country and have many dear friends there still. Oh, that must be your
oh,
daughter.
yes, she's
Hi.
leaving.
It's okay.
School time. It's 3 o'clock. School just got out. She must not have known I was on here. So carry on.
No worries. Um, so I did a lot of traveling in Australia and really loved that country and
Uh-huh.
haven't been back since 2010. Sadly, I would love to go back. Um, but I traveled there annually, if not biannually, for 9 years. So
Wow.
for sure, that's a contender. And then my international European traveling didn't really start until I had already moved to China.
Mm.
So now, gosh, it's really hard not to fall in love with Europe. It's
Yeah.
so hard not to fall in love with France or the Netherlands or even Prague. I loved Prague as a city.
Mm.
But I did up and move all the way across the world. So I did one of the biggest moves you can do to a country where at the time when I moved here, my Chinese was very rusty and very
Mhm.
academic.
Mm.
Um, and then I was doing that move at the same time that I was suddenly partnered with a man, and
Mm.
then we got married, and we speak Chinese together. So we were partnered in a language that wasn't my first language. So
Uh-huh.
the challenges that I associate with having moved to China, including restarting my career and then
Right.
becoming a mother in a foreign land, those challenges there's so many and they're so great and simultaneous that now the thought of moving to a foreign country makes me pause.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
maybe not.
Yeah,
Maybe
because it
not.
was probably a lot more, I wouldn't maybe say the word traumatic because that's maybe not the right word, but overwhelming because you had so much. And to think about only taking off one piece of that, which is the move, which would be overwhelming and traumatic for many. Um, yeah, it's probably hard to even imagine that because you didn't just do one, you did kind of all at once.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, in Chinese, the word for overwhelming is, or a way to express it is 头大了, and 头 means head and 大 means big. So when your head
Oh,
feels big,
yeah.
and now I
Yes.
think of overwhelming as when my head feels like it's going to explode.
Yeah, absolutely. And that would be fitting. I mean, I think about just moving across the furthest I've moved is like an hour away. I've always kind of been settled in my little spot. But we're exploring that, down the road here. My one that just walked in, my 13-year-old, when she graduates, we plan on moving kind of and being a little bit more nomadic. And the thought of that to me is easy because I like change. But when you're in it and you're just moving across town, it's like, oh my God, all of the logistics, all of the just utility changes, and you go from one company to another. I can't even fathom what it would be like logistically going to a whole nother country where there's a different language, a full different way of doing things. And I mean, just your government there is totally different. Tell me about some of those struggles that you learned along the way, as well as part two to that, some of the struggles with living in China, being so different from the Western way of things.
Yeah,
It's a
well,
lot.
the infrastructure here for sure is difficult to wrap your head around. And I am grateful for my ex-husband, my ex-partner, who at the time when I moved here was just my boyfriend, um, my new exotic boyfriend.
Yeah.
um, and he's of course first language Mandarin, so he was able to really walk me through some of those changes, which expats who come here, foreigners who come here and settle, really have a difficult time trying to figure out how to pay for their water bill, even
Yes.
something like that, or how to set up a phone account and how to even just navigate the transit system.
Yeah.
So I really had a crutch at that
Mm.
time, and I'm really grateful for that. Uh, but you're right. Even being here 14 and a half years, I still find that I function differently than Chinese people. I'm just not culturally Chinese.
Mhm.
So you can get used to some of those infrastructure things. You can figure out how to pay for your water bill, but you can never really figure out how to think about things the way Chinese people think about things.
Mm.
So, for instance, here's an example. Um, this is a culture of rote learning. So, the education system here, if you have not have the privilege of being educated in some sort of private school or international school,
Mhm.
the Chinese education system is one of a lot of memorization.
Mm.
It's respecting the teacher, it's not questioning, there's not a lot of critical thinking.
Mm.
So, all of that then gets translated into how people operate in the world. I have many Chinese friends, so we've done a lot of talking about this, and it's shifting and changing and opening up. But traditional Chinese thinking doesn't leave a lot of room for critical analysis, and it doesn't leave a lot of room for questioning authority.
Sure.
So, how does that translate into everyday life? If you if you go to a restaurant and you, for instance, I'm vegetarian
Mhm.
and I cannot eat gluten, which is a pain in the neck
Sure.
everywhere in the world. But
Yes.
when you go to the US or you go to Canada, you can say, "Hey, can I get that without the bread?" Or can you put the chicken on the side and then I'll, feed it to someone at my table who
Sure.
will eat it. But here in China, an example like that kind of situation where you have to ask a wait staff to do something outside of the menu creates a real conflict. And
Yeah.
so then you'll say, no, no, we don't have that. We don't have it like that. We don't
Mm.
offer it like that. The way it's offered is like this. And that is sanctioned by my boss and by my
Yeah.
chef. And if I question that, then I'm going outside of the parameters of my job. So you're
Yeah.
asking me to break the rules of my job if I do something like offer you a variation on
Yeah.
what is offered,
So,
and therefore I'm disrespecting the authority figures in my life as a wait staff. So the answer that they would give me is no, no, sorry,
yeah,
we don't have that. And I said, well, you
sure.
do have that. It's just in different combinations here. Can I put it together? No, no,
No.
I can't. No, I can't do it. And
Oh
I
my
sometimes
gosh.
will set a waiter or a waitress into a spiral when I ask something. So, and I ask it in fluent Mandarin. So it's not a question of language
Language, no, culture.
misunderstanding. It's just a
Yeah.
question of culture misunderstanding. So I've learned how to navigate that, how to make jokes with it,
Uh,
how to order something and then recreate it myself at the table. I've
yeah.
learned how to figure out how to feed myself in a restaurant. Um, but that's just a very minor, it's a very innocuous example. But that, of course, comes out in other ways, like in workplace situations or when you're trying to navigate a gig or when you're
Yeah.
trying to get the answers to a question that you would you need as a foreigner, but Chinese
Sure.
people don't need.
Right.
And you have to try and figure out your way. And that Chinese way is also not very direct. I'm very direct as a Westerner. So I've learned how to ask my questions to the left and to the right, and then that'll eventually get me to the center, which
Interesting.
I have to disengage when I go back to the West, because that is seen as manipulative when you go back to the
Yes.
West.
Yeah, absolutely. That is fascinating.
Or passive aggressive,
Yep.
which I'm definitely not as a personality type.
Yeah. Huh. Okay. I mean, I would love to, I could sit here and just ask very stupid questions about China my like entire life because I have so many. But I did promise you I would respect your time. I guess kind of to wrap this up, what's next for you? And What is your, I guess, your favorite, most inspiring thing that you can say for listeners who are thinking about maybe living life outside of the box? Because you definitely live outside of the box. What's some advice, some inspiration that you could give them, and what's next for you?
Well, that's a very big question. Oh, first of all,
Mhm.
I still have 20 minutes. I'm
Oh, you
good.
do? Okay, we'll
Yeah,
keep
I'm
going
good.
then.
And there is no dumb question about China. I love when people ask me questions about China because I feel like the West doesn't depict China anywhere near to accurately. So, and there's a ton of bias against China right now. The recent weather balloon incident
Mhm.
being a great example. Who knows what the result will be of that whole story?
Yeah.
But when you ask me what would I say to people who want to live outside the box? I've never lived inside the box. I don't really know what it's like to live inside the box. Sometimes I dream of a life like that. I
Mm.
think, what is it to wake up every day in the same house and to go to the same job every day? That seems comforting to me. There's something about that that might be very stabilizing.
Mm.
But I have never done it. And maybe to me, it would be the most unusual and it would be the most precarious way of living or vicarious way of living
Sure.
um, because I've never done it. So I would say, first of all, to draw your own box, I guess, don't, or to redraw it. If you if you think of the box as a 9 to 5 job
Mhm.
and a steady address and a very consistent um, perhaps you would put the adjective monotonous on that
Mhm.
life,
Sure.
then maybe you need to just redraw it wider first and do something that is a little bit adventurous. And maybe it's a change of job or it's moving house or um, reducing to part time so that you can do something that you absolutely adore, some hobby that you adore more frequently, and a little perhaps to be moving up to making that hobby into your career. But then it's wider and wider and wider. And it then becomes a situation where suddenly you realize you don't have a specific parameter for how life should be lived. It's just um, the wobblier it is, perhaps the more in balance it becomes.
Mhm.
And I think that um, most people are really afraid to take any kind of risk, to risk even listening to their heart about something. Because often
Yes.
when we listen to our heart, it doesn't have a guarantee. We don't know that we're going to land on our feet when we jump. We don't know we're going to make enough money to survive. We don't, if we do something that we love, we don't know if we're going to crash and burn if we move across the country or move across the world or decide to allow oneself to love someone who doesn't fit the definition of what the kind of person we've loved in the past.
Sure.
Um, but how do you know the answer unless you just take the leap of faith? I mean, to me, risk is nothing to be afraid of. Risk is actually something to embrace. I have
Yes.
never done anything but embrace risk because that's always been my norm. But for those who haven't done that, it's scary the first time. But as soon as they do, as soon as anyone does something crazy, quote
Mhm.
unquote crazy,
Quote
to me it's
unquote. Yeah.
normal.
Uh-huh.
Um, as soon as someone does something risky, the
Uh,
first time they will hopefully be inspired to do it again. Um, you know, what else is there except
yeah.
risk and adventure? I just
Yeah.
really don't want to live this life in a way that makes me look back and say, I really didn't do much,
Yeah.
or I really didn't believe I could do much. And, so I have, for example, I get this question from fellow expats a lot. They they want to know how to stay in China if they don't necessarily teach English.
Mm. Because that's the main way to stay. Is that why?
Oh, for sure. I would say 95% of the expats that I know, um, they are English teachers here,
Mm.
for sure. But I do a variety of things. Like, I'm not just a full time musician. I also have this studio where I'm sitting right now, and I
Uh,
do some voiceover on the side for various clients. My partner and I started a business here a few years ago, and that's a foreign owned company, which is a huge thing to have done. But that allows me to have an umbrella for some of the other things I do, which includes vocal training. I have a few vocal students, and once a week I do teach at a international school where I teach a music creation program. Um, and what else do I do? I do a little bit of vocal training in the education sector, but um, that's an extension of my vocal training. Um, and I'm a parent here. I'm a full-time
Uh,
mom. So I don't get paid for that.
right.
Jeez, we should get paid for that.
We should.
Um, but all of those sort of freelance things that I do. Oh, I'm a
Uh,
writer too. I have a master's degree in writing, so I do some writing for magazines. And um, I think that those kinds of freelance style careers are often very scary to people. Like, how
yes.
do I do a little bit of this and a little bit of that and a little bit of this and then cobble it all together to pay my mortgage or my rent
Mhm.
or and feed my children? But it's very possible. It's possible if it's possible for me in a foreign country, it's possible for anyone in their
Yes.
home country. It's really possible. You just have to be a good juggler
Yeah.
and make it work.
And take risks, because without risks we have no growth, because it is risks that's it forces us to step outside of our comfort zone, and that's where growth happens. Oh, yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Fantastic on that. Well, I guess since we've got a couple more minutes, I'll ask about the Chinese balloon. I'm like, we'll see if she brings this up. What are you ever afraid living in China because of the not so great relationship that, you know, Westerners have with China in general?
Well, so I think that currently there are conflicts happening between Chinese government and Western government. So the U.S. and China have a very a friction-based relationship right
Yeah.
now, and it's come and gone over the years, where there's been greater friction at certain times, and currently it's a high level of friction between the
Mhm.
U.S. and China. A few years ago, there was a high level of friction between Canada and China as well. And as a Canadian,
Mhm.
I was a little nervous during that time. Um, that was with um, there were some various political issues, let's just say, with
Sure. Hmm.
Canada and China. But I was a little nervous as to whether or not my identity as a Canadian would therefore translate into people mistreating me or me not being able to get certain paperwork
Yeah.
processed or something, because you never really know how the political will influence the practical.
Yeah.
But the practical is things like the bureaucracy of things, getting visas processed, making sure that your identity doesn't somehow translate into some sort of prejudice against you, which you can never prove, right?
Right.
Because and that happens everywhere in the world. You can never really prove whether something about you that uh, has in the past or in the present created some sort of form of oppression is going to impact your everyday life. And people worry about that in the West too. So
Yeah.
during 2000 during the 11/11 and uh, post 9/11,
Mhm.
sorry, not 11/11, yeah,
Yeah.
11/11
9/11.
from yeah,
9/11. Yep.
people are always were people of Middle Eastern descent were worried that their Middle Eastern
Yeah.
identity would impact their life, their everyday life in the US. That's a great
Yeah.
example. And every day, people of LGBTQ identity and etc. worry that their queerness or their identity of some way will impact their everyday life through this invisible or veiled prejudice.
Mm.
Okay,
Mhm.
so I have that. But then I want to talk about the next layer, which is the human layer. So, yes, the US and China have friction politically,
Mhm.
but Americans and Chinese people have been getting along for centuries, really, for the last two
Right.
centuries, with Chinese people living in the U.S. and
Yep.
Americans traveling to China. There's a huge Chinese population in the U.S. and in Canada, and
Mhm.
there's tons of immigration between these two countries, between these three countries.
Mhm.
So currently, I recognize the political issues, and I'm sometimes worried about that veiled bureaucratic prejudice, but
Mhm.
I'm never worried about the human prejudice
Mm.
because Chinese people will still say to me, Canada's a great country. Oh, my cousin lives there. My mother-in-law lives there.
Sure.
My ex brother-in-law is settled in Toronto. And the same goes for the US. There's so many students studying in the US and parents living in the US to accompany their students,
Yeah.
their children who have graduated and then um, settled and gotten a green card in the US. So there's a lot of good feeling towards our countries, our mutual dynamic, the
Yeah.
West and the East, on a human level. So for that reason, there's so many more people here than there are politics. For that reason, I'm not afraid because really, this country, while it has a very strong government, um, the people are really what control what's
Yeah.
happening here in a lot of ways because the population is so massive.
Mm.
Um, and even people within the government will have connections, personal human connections to the US or to Canada that that mean I have no reason to fear.
Sure.
Um, but during the pandemic, it was hard. It was tough being here because there were so many controls, and I'm grateful that they've lifted those controls, and now we're going to be able to travel outside the borders, and that's good.
Very beautifully
That's a
said.
bigger story.
Yeah,
But
yeah, for sure. But I love how you describe that, the human element, because when I'm going to say just me, when I'm studying and looking at where I'm going to travel as a tourist, of course, the first thing that you look at is safety, because I'm not going to drag my kids somewhere where it's not safe. And that's been something that people have brought up in the past is like, oh, it's, China's not safe, but it's so refreshing to hear you say that, to bring it back to the human level, because you're right, it's government, and government is people, and people they're human, and humans, we're all controlled by the same ultimate thing. Our driving force is all the same, which is love, deep
hmm
down. And
and actually, China's really safe. Like in terms of
yeah.
crime, there's no
Mm-hmm.
guns here, and there's as a foreigner, you're even more safe because any Chinese person that like if you there's no like nighttime attacks here. I can
Interesting.
walk home at 2 in the morning without fearing for my safety. I can't do that in Canada or the US.
No, definitely
So
not.
this is a really safe place, especially for foreigners, because if a Chinese person were to attack a foreigner here or there were any kind of crime against a foreigner, they would be even more punished.
Interesting. Why is that?
Well, it would be a huge loss of face. That's huge.
Mm-hmm.
A big part of Chinese culture is the need to save face, to not
Uh-huh.
lose face. And I'm not saying that Chinese people regularly attack anyone, but
Right.
if they were to attack a guest, a foreign guest
Uh-huh.
in their land, uh, the you know security officers or the government, the
Sure.
criminal code would be even more punishing for
Mm,
that
interesting.
because that's disrespectful
Right.
to our foreign guests. That's how
Yeah.
Chinese people would see it. These are our foreign guests, and even more so, we should protect them. We should
Right.
give them even more um, reason to feel safe here, to feel welcome
Okay.
here.
And can you travel I mean, is travel pretty easy in comparison to other places that you've seen internationally, for somebody like myself as a tourist, if I was going to go check it out? Pretty easy?
Yeah, very easy. There's a lot of travel, a ton of travel routes here and lots of travel companies. The only downfall for
Uh,
foreigners coming here is that you don't have the language. So you must rely on a tour guide and a travel company to host you, which
mm.
means you cannot make as many choices because some of those choices are pre-made for you.
Yep. Black
Um,
and white. We
yeah.
don't vary,
So
no variance.
exactly.
Off the
So
agenda.
my friends who have come here who have traveled through me have had a wonderful time. And
Yeah.
it would be good to travel through a foreign-owned travel company here, which might be a
Okay.
little more expensive, but then you have a bit more variance. You can definitely pick and choose more easily, and perhaps you'd find it easier to communicate. There would at least be some native speakers that you can speak with. But
Sure.
there are more English speakers as a second language here in China than there are native English speakers in the world.
Wow. That's
So
phenomenal.
I know that this is a country of a huge population,
Mhm.
and people are worried, oh, I come here, I can't communicate. But you will find a lot of people who can speak English to you because they've
Sure.
learned it.
Right. Yeah. That's what I've heard. I mean, from others that have been doing a lot of travel. So what's next for you, for Ember?
Oh, yeah, you asked me that.
Yeah, we'll
Um,
wrap it up with that question.
that's great. What's next? Well, I have been trapped in COVID borders and COVID controlled China since 2020. And I really look forward to going back to see my family this summer. That'll be my first international trip. It will have been 4 years by the time I
Wow.
get out of this country. I'm so missing my family. But musically, I released an album in 2021, which many of my international fans have only heard digitally. I really look forward to being able to perform that for people outside of China.
Hmm.
And I have a whole new body of songs that I'm just starting to record. In March, we'll be going to Shanghai to do 3 songs at in a live recording opportunity that I'm
Uh,
really looking forward to. And then we'll be doing some domestic touring here, a whole theater tour through cities all throughout mainland China with my band, which is
uh,
also something I'm really looking forward to doing. Um, and, just we're moving into spring here. So I'm looking forward to the warmer weather coming in.
yeah,
And I hope by the fall of 2023, I can start looking at getting back to touring in Europe and build getting my touring back on track post
sure.
pandemic, which is something I'd really like to happen.
Yeah, boy, I'm excited to see what happens for you with, I bet you have big growth after being so settled for 3.5, almost 4 years. You'll get out in the world literally and figuratively and probably have just a huge growth because you'll be exposed to stuff that you haven't got to see in the last 4 years and energized. I'm sure you feel well rested after being so, naturally quieted down for through the pandemic.
Yeah, the lack of travel during this time has been really strange for someone who's been a traveler and been on the road for so many decades.
Yeah.
But now I did do a lot of domestic performance. So Beijing shows have been frequent. And
Mhm.
like in the month of March, except for one show, I have 9 bookings and only one of them is outside of the city.
Oh,
So
wow.
it's a busy city and I can do regular local shows and that's wonderful. So I'm very I have to appreciate Beijing. If you have to be trapped anywhere as a musician, a city of 25 million people with lots of performance opportunity is okay for a musician. I was really lucky. I kept my performance chops up. So,
Good. Good for you. Okay, Ember. Well, I am so grateful for you taking the time at 6 a.m. your time to sit and chit
oh,
chat with me about China, about music, about your amazing journey and your bravery with coming out and then going back, I guess. Is that how you say it? With
I guess I'm it's
with
just
your community. Yeah, I think it's really interesting to hear you share that with our listeners. And boy, I just think that you are like the picture of just risk and in a positive way, just living life as it should be, which is lived and doing things differently. I think it's beautiful. You have a great
thank
story, and I
you. Thank you
appreciate
for
you
those
taking the
words.
time.
I
Yeah.
appreciate you having me on your podcast. Thanks so much. It's lovely to meet you. Please stay in
Yes.
touch.
Yes, absolutely. I'm going to listen to some of your music, and I will definitely be putting China on my list of travel things coming up in the next several years. And it makes me feel good that it's somewhere that I would feel safe traveling. That it's
Yeah.
the culture itself is anti-violent, which is really good. So I'll be
And
doing some
if you're
research.
here when I'm here, make sure you let me
Yes,
know
I
because I would love to
will.
meet you in person.
I would love that. Thank you so much, Ember. I appreciate it.
No problem. Take care.
You too.
Bye.